Hello, this is Bill Bullard with R-CALF USA, the voice of the independent cattle producer in the United States of America. Well, this week in Omaha, Nebraska, a cattle price rally will be held to call attention to the challenges currently facing the U.S. live cattle industry. What prompted this rally is what can be viewed as the new norm for our industry. That new norm is that for several years, strong beef demand, strong beef exports, and near record prices for wholesale and retail beef have equated to seriously depressed prices paid to U.S. cattle producers. Current cattle prices are as much as 25% below the previous 5-year average. Producers selling 550 weight calves are receiving about $250 less than that average, and producers selling fed cattle are receiving about $336 less. That means that cattle producers are earning less for their cattle while their cost of inputs to produce those cattle have increased. This is called an economic cost price squeeze, and this unfavorable situation appears to be worsening. In fact, we believe we are standing in the threshold of an impending crisis in our industry. In other words, we believe that while many producers are already experiencing financial strain, we think this situation will intensify over the next 90 to 120 days. And that's because many cow-calf producers are just now receiving their annual paychecks during this fall run season when calves are weaned from the cow and marketed to feedlots. This fall run will last for 2 or 3 more months, and only when it's over will the cattle rancher learn what his or her paycheck will be for the year. So the question is, what can and should the industry do in the face of this impending crisis? Now let's back up a bit. In August, the Secretary of Agriculture announced that his Packers and Stockyards Division would investigate the conduct of the packers and other industry participants following the August 9th fire that shut down the Tyson plant in Holcomb, Kansas. After that shutdown, both futures market prices and cash market prices plummeted. Now, we support the Secretary's call for an investigation, and we encourage him to conduct a thorough probing investigation into the structure of our cattle markets. But let's back up even further. Before the Tyson fire that has created a virtual firestorm within our industry, R-CALF USA and 4 independent cattle feeders filed a historic class action antitrust lawsuit against the Big Four packers. We filed the lawsuit in April, alleging at the time that the Big Four packers had conspired to artificially depress fed cattle prices, thereby inflating their own margins and profits. So the question we need to address today is, what else can be done? Well, we know that Congress is currently considering whether to approve the recently rewritten North American Free Trade Agreement, or NAFTA. That agreement has been in effect for 25 years, and during those 25 years, our industry lost 20% of all of its beef cattle farms and ranches, 75% of the nation's farmer feeders, which are those with feedlots capacities of less than 1,000 head, and we shrunk our mother cow herd by 3 million animals. While that's not the outcome many in the industry thought would occur when we opened our borders to Canada and Mexico, the facts are the facts, and that's what happened. The newly proposed U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement makes no changes whatsoever to the trade in cattle and beef. That means that if Congress passes this new USMCA, we should expect that the negative trends we realized under NAFTA will be expected to continue on into the future. That would be devastating to our industry, and the reason is this. The cattle industry relies exclusively on a competitive marketplace for its income, so maintaining a competitive market structure is absolutely essential to the viability of our industry. But our competitive market structure itself is dependent on a critical mass of cattle producers, cattle feeders, and cattle sales outlets to facilitate competition. If we lose the critical mass of participants along the supply chain needed to maintain those competitive marketing channels, it's game over for the U.S. cattle industry as we know it today. At that point, we go the way our sister industries, the hog and poultry industries, have already gone, toward a fully integrated top-down controlled meat packer supply chain. And that's what's at risk here, and this risk is borne not just by independent cattle producers, but by every rural community in America that depends on a strong cattle-based economy for their well-being. That's why we've called upon Congress to vote no on the USMCA unless the provisions for cattle and beef trade are changed. One change we would like to see is the restoration of mandatory country of origin labeling, so U.S. cattle producers can begin to compete with the growing tide of cheaper, undifferentiated beef imports that function as direct substitutes for exclusively USA-produced beef. With that, we're out of time. We hope you have a productive week. Thank you and goodbye.